Have you ever loved someone so deeply that losing them felt like losing a part of your soul? That's how I felt about Jack, our loyal German Shepherd. He wasn't just a dog, he was family, a protector, and my daughter Emily's best friend. The day he disappeared, our world turned upside down. This is the story of heartbreak, hope, and a miracle that taught me the true meaning of loyalty and love. Before we dive into this incredible journey, make sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. We have more inspiring and heartwarming stories like this one, and you won't want to miss them. I still remember the way Jack used to bound across the backyard, his black and tan fur gleaming in the sunlight. He was fearless, intelligent, and gentle, especially with Emily. My daughter was only 6 when Jack joined our family, and from the moment they met, they were inseparable. Wherever Emily went, Jack followed, his tail wagging like a flag of pure happiness. Life was perfect until that stormy evening 5 years ago. The sky turned an ominous shade of gray, and the wind howled like a wild animal. Emily and I were inside, huddled together, watching the weather forecast, while Jack rested by the door. He always hated storms, pacing nervously when thunder rumbled in the distance. That night, as the storm grew more intense, I realized Jack wasn't in his usual spot by the door. Panic gripped me. "Emily, have you seen Jack?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Her big brown eyes widened as she shook her head. "No, Daddy, I thought he was with you." The door had been blown open by the wind. Jack must have bolted into the chaos, frightened by the storm. I grabbed a flashlight and a raincoat, telling Emily to stay inside. The storm pounded relentlessly as I called out his name, my voice lost in the howling wind. "Jack! Jack, come back!" The rain soaked through my clothes, but I didn't care. I searched every corner of the yard, the neighboring streets, and even the woods nearby, but Jack was nowhere to be found. Hours turned into what felt like a lifetime, and eventually I had to return home, drenched and heartbroken. Emily was waiting for me at the door, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daddy, where's Jack?" she asked, her voice trembling. I knelt down and hugged her tightly, my own tears mixing with the rain on my face. "We'll find him, sweetheart," I promised, though my chest ached with uncertainty. "We'll find Jack." The next morning, we began what would become our routine for months. Emily and I printed out dozens of flyers with Jack's picture, his alert ears, soulful eyes, and that playful grin he always had. We posted them on every telephone pole, handed them out to neighbors, and even left them at local shelters and vet clinics. People were kind, calling with possible sightings and offering to help search. But as days turned into weeks, hope began to wane. Emily would sit by the window every evening, clutching Jack's favorite toy, waiting for him to come home. "He'll be back, Daddy," she'd say with the unwavering faith only a child could have. "Jack knows the way home." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that Jack, our brave and brilliant German Shepherd, would somehow find his way back to us. But as the months passed, I began to accept the painful reality: Jack was gone. Even so, I couldn't bring myself to throw away his things. His leash hung by the door, his bed remained in the corner of the living room, and his toys were neatly arranged in a basket. It was as if letting go of those things would mean letting go of him, and I wasn't ready for that. But Emily never gave up. Every night she prayed for Jack, asking God to bring him home. And every morning she'd look out the window, hoping to see his familiar silhouette trotting up the driveway. Little did we know Jack's journey was just beginning. While we mourned his absence, he was out there somewhere, facing challenges we couldn't imagine. He was lost, but he wasn't broken. And in his heart, I believe he never stopped searching for us. The world outside our warm home must have been terrifying for Jack. He was a brave dog, yes, but he was also a family dog, a protector who thrived on the companionship of those he loved. Without us, I can only imagine how lost and confused he must have felt. In the days after the storm, Jack likely wandered through unfamiliar neighborhoods, dodging cars and searching desperately for any sign of us. His keen nose and sharp instincts must have guided him at first, but the chaos of the storm had likely thrown off even his exceptional senses. I tried not to think about it too much back then, but now, knowing what he endured, it breaks my heart. Jack had always been resourceful. He could open doors, fetch tools, and even solve little puzzles I'd give him for treats. But out there, alone in the wild, those skills became his lifeline. From what the shelter later pieced together, Jack spent months surviving on his own, scavenging for food and sleeping wherever he could find safety. I imagine him darting through alleys, his coat dirtied and his ribs beginning to show. A dog of his size and breed was always noticed, but not always welcomed. He must have faced aggressive strays, cold nights, and the constant hunger that gnawed at his belly. Yet Jack was resilient. That's just who he was. Somewhere along the way, he must have encountered people, kind strangers who fed him scraps or gave him shelter for a night. I'd like to believe that the world wasn't entirely cruel to him during those years, but even with those fleeting moments of care, Jack never stayed long. His heart belonged to us, and he wasn't ready to settle anywhere else. Back at home, life felt emptier without him. Emily's prayers grew softer, and though she never said it aloud, I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. Still, she refused to give up completely. Every few weeks, she'd ask to print more flyers or check in with the local shelters. "What if someone found him, Daddy?" she'd say, clutching Jack's photo. "What if they just don't know he's ours?" Her faith kept me going, even when mine faltered. I couldn't bear to take down the flyers or throw away his things, because deep down I wanted to believe too. But as the years passed, the likelihood of finding Jack seemed like a distant dream. Emily grew older, and though her love for him never faded, she stopped looking out the window every night. Life moved on, but a piece of our family was still missing. Meanwhile, Jack continued his journey. Over time, his once pristine coat grew shaggy and matted, and his strong frame became leaner from constant hunger. But his spirit never wavered. He was a survivor, and no matter how far he wandered, he carried us with him. I like to think that it was our love that kept him going, even when the odds were stacked against him. At some point, Jack found himself in the countryside, far from the bustling streets where he'd first been lost. The open fields and quiet woods must have felt safer, giving him a chance to rest and recover. Maybe he caught the scent of familiar places, fragments of home that pulled him in a certain direction. Whatever it was, something deep within him told him to keep moving. I didn't know it then, but Jack's journey wasn't aimless. Every step he took, every challenge he overcame, was leading him back to us. He was lost, yes, but he wasn't giving up. And even after years apart, his loyalty never wavered. Back home, Emily and I found ways to honor his memory. We donated to shelters in his name, helped lost pets reunite with their families, and always kept a light on by the front door, just in case. Little did we know Jack was out there, braving the world and holding on to the hope that one day he'd find his way back to us. Years passed, but Jack was never forgotten. His leash remained by the door, his favorite toy untouched in a corner of the living room. Emily, now a teenager, had grown quieter about her prayers for Jack's return, but ever so often I'd catch her looking at old photos or sitting by the window with his toy in her hands. It was a quiet ritual, a way of keeping hope alive, even when logic told us he might be gone for good. For me, the loss of Jack was a wound that never fully healed. He was more than a pet. He was a mind that I often found myself imagining what life might have been like if he'd never gone missing. Would he have grown gray around his muzzle, slowing down as the years went on? Would Emily have taken him on long walks after school, telling him all about her day? The what-ifs haunted me, but they also fueled my determination to keep his memory alive. One evening, as I sorted through a box of old belongings, I stumbled across Jack's puppy collar. It was small, frayed around the edges, and still had the faintest smell of him. I held it in my hands for what felt like an eternity, memories flooding back. "You're still out there, buddy," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. "I can feel it." Meanwhile, Jack was enduring his own struggles. After years of wandering, his body was lean, his coat ragged, but his eyes still held that same spark of determination. Something deep within him, a memory, a scent, or perhaps just instinct, drove him forward. He was no longer the vibrant, energetic dog he once was, but he hadn't given up. Not on himself, and not on us. It was during one of his countless treks across fields and towns that a kind stranger noticed him. Jack had stumbled into the outskirts of a small town, tired and hungry. The man, a farmer named Carl, had seen stray dogs before, but something about Jack was different. He wasn't just surviving, he seemed to be searching. Carl offered Jack food and water, his gentle demeanor earning Jack's trust. As Jack rested in the shade of the farmer's porch, Carl noticed the faint remnants of a collar around his neck, the worn leather a testament to Jack's long journey. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, boy?" Carl said, scratching Jack behind the ears. Jack responded with a faint wag of his tail, a small gesture, but one filled with gratitude. Recognizing that Jack might belong to someone, Carl took a photo of him and shared it on social media with a simple caption, "Found this brave soul wandering near my farm. Looks like he's been lost for a while. Anyone recognize him?" He also contacted the local shelter, hoping to find clues about Jack's past. Back home, Emily was scrolling through her phone one evening when she stumbled upon the post. She froze, her heart pounding as she stared at the screen. The dog in the photo was older, thinner, and rough around the edges, but those eyes, they were unmistakable. "Dad!" she yelled, rushing into the living room. "Come quick!" I hurried over, alarmed by the urgency in her voice. She shoved the phone into my hands, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's Jack," she whispered. "I know it's him." I stared at the photo, my breath catching in my throat. Could it really be? The dog in the picture looked so different, but there was something about him, something familiar. "Emily," I said cautiously, "I don't want to get our hopes up." "It's him," she insisted, her voice steady and full of conviction. "I can feel it." That night we contacted Carl, sharing photos of Jack and explaining our story. He was kind and understanding, offering to meet us halfway if Jack truly was ours. My heart raced as I thanked him, the possibility of seeing Jack again both thrilling and terrifying. As we prepared for the meeting, I couldn't help but feel a spark of hope reignite. For the first time in years, the idea of holding Jack again felt like more than just a dream. Emily was practically glowing with excitement, her belief in Jack never once faltering. The next day we packed Jack's favorite toy, his leash, and a blanket that still smelled faintly of our home. "Hang on, buddy," I whispered as we drove. "We're coming for you." The drive to meet Carl felt like the longest of my life. Emily sat beside me, clutching Jack's old toy in her hands, her knuckles white with anticipation. Every few minutes, she would glance at me and whisper, "It has to be him, Dad. It just has to be." I wanted to share her certainty, but doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. What if we were wrong? What if the years had changed Jack beyond recognition? As we pulled into the meeting spot, a quiet park halfway between our home and Carl's farm, I saw a truck parked under a large oak tree. Standing beside it was a man in overalls, holding the leash of a dog. My breath caught as I saw the familiar silhouette, but my heart hesitated. The dog was thinner, his coat rougher, his posture more guarded. But then I saw his eyes, those deep, soulful eyes that had comforted us for so many years. It was Jack. "Dad, it's him!" Emily cried, flinging open the car door before I could even respond. She ran toward Jack, her tears already streaming. At first he stood still as if unsure of what was happening. But then, as Emily called his name, something shifted. His ears perked up, his tail began to wag tentatively, and then, like a dam breaking, he bolted toward her. "Jack," Emily sobbed, dropping to her knees as he reached her. His wagging tail hit her like a drum, his nose pressing into her hands, her lap, her face, as if he couldn't believe it was real. I stood frozen for a moment, my chest tight with emotion. Then I walked toward them, my own tears blurring the scene before me. When I knelt down, Jack turned to me, his eyes locking onto mine. In that moment, all the years apart melted away. He let out a deep, almost relieved bark, and pushed his head into my chest. I wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his fur. "It's you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You found your way back." Carl stood off to the side, smiling at the reunion. "He's been waiting for this," he said. "The moment I saw the way he perked up when you sent me those photos, I knew he belonged to you." As we loaded Jack into the car, I noticed how he curled up in the back seat like he'd never left. Emily rested her hand on his side, her smile never fading. "Welcome home, Jack," she said softly, her voice full of love. The drive back was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes from a heart full of emotion. Jack occasionally lifted his head to look out the window, as if recognizing the roads that led back to his home. When we pulled into the driveway, his tail started wagging furiously, his body practically vibrating with excitement. Inside the house, it was as if Jack had never left. He went straight to his old bed, sniffing it before lying down with a contented sigh. Emily placed his favorite toy beside him, and he grabbed it in his mouth, his tail thumping against the floor. I watched as he looked around the room, his eyes settling on each familiar object. He was home. That night, as Emily fell asleep with Jack curled up at her feet, I sat in the living room staring at the leash still hanging by the door. For years, it had been a painful reminder of his absence. Now it was a symbol of something else, of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond we shared. Jack's return wasn't just a miracle, it was a testament to his loyalty and love. Despite everything he'd faced, he never gave up on us. And now, neither would we. The days after Jack's return felt like a dream. Watching him move through the house, sniffing every corner, and wagging his tail at the slightest familiar scent made it feel like the years of separation had melted away. But there were moments, quiet ones, where I noticed the toll his journey had taken. He wasn't the same exuberant, unshakable Jack we had lost all those years ago. He was older, leaner, and carried the weight of his survival in every step. Still, he was home, and that was all that mattered. Emily was inseparable from Jack, just as she had been before. Every morning, I'd find her curled up on the floor beside his bed, her hand resting on his side as he slept. "I missed you so much, Jack," she'd whisper, and even in his sleep, his tail would give a small thump. She took it upon herself to brush his coat every day, removing the dirt and tangles from his time on the streets, and her joy was palpable as his fur regained its familiar sheen. For Jack, it took time to adjust. He was hesitant at first, watching us carefully, as though trying to confirm that this wasn't just another fleeting stop on his long journey. Meals were a quiet ritual. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, as if he wasn't sure when his next meal might come. It broke my heart to think about the hunger he must have endured, but I reminded myself that those days were behind him now. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Jack, watching the sunset, I felt a familiar weight press against my leg. Jack had rested his head on my knee, his eyes meeting mine with a look of pure trust. "You're safe now, buddy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "You'll never have to go through that again." He seemed to understand, letting out a contented sigh as his tail wagged lazily. In that moment, I realized just how much Jack had taught me. Over the years, I had tried to move on, to accept that he might be gone forever. But Jack hadn't given up on us. He had spent years fighting to find his way back, and in doing so, he reminded me of the strength that comes from love and loyalty. Emily and I worked together to help Jack rebuild his confidence. Walks around the neighborhood became part of our daily routine, though Jack would occasionally stop and glance over his shoulder, as if making sure we were still there. "We're not going anywhere," I'd tell him, and he'd wag his tail in response, his pace quickening as we continued. One day, as we walked through the park, a little boy ran up to Jack, holding out a stick. "Can your dog play fetch?" he asked eagerly. I hesitated, unsure if Jack still had the energy for it, but Emily spoke up. "He used to love it," she said, crouching beside him and scratching his neck. "Didn't you, Jack?" She took the stick and tossed it gently, and for a moment, Jack just watched it land. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he took off after it, his tail wagging furiously. He returned with the stick in his mouth, dropping it at Emily's feet before barking happily. It was the first time I'd seen him truly playful since his return, and my heart swelled with joy. As the weeks turned into months, Jack settled back into his old routines. He rediscovered his favorite spots around the house, greeted the mailman with a wagging tail, and even reclaimed his place as the protector of our home. But more than that, he became a symbol of resilience and hope for Emily and me. His journey had been long and filled with hardship, but he had never stopped believing in the love that awaited him. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Emily, Jack, and me, I looked at the two of them and felt a profound sense of gratitude. "You've always been part of this family, Jack," I said, wrapping an arm around him. "And you always will be." Jack let out a soft huff, resting his head in Emily's lap as she stroked his fur. The years apart had tested us all, but they had also brought us closer in ways I never thought possible. Jack's return wasn't just a miracle, it was a reminder that love, no matter the distance or time, has a way of finding its way home. It had been months since Jack came back into our lives, but the feeling of having him home still felt surreal. Watching him curled up in his old bed, his chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm, was a sight I thought I'd never see again. His presence brought a completeness to our home, as though a missing piece of our hearts had finally been restored. Emily was transformed by his return. She was no longer the quiet, wistful teenager who sat by the window, hoping for a miracle. She was vibrant and full of energy, spending every spare moment with Jack. Whether it was brushing his fur, throwing sticks in the yard, or simply lying beside him whispering secrets, Jack had become her closest confidant once more. It was as if the years apart had melted away. One day, as we sat together in the living room, Emily turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," she said, resting her hand on Jack's head, "do you think he ever stopped thinking about us?" I smiled, reaching down to scratch Jack's ears. "Not for a second," I said. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that a dog's love never fades." He knew where he belonged, and no matter how far he was, he never gave up trying to come back. Emily nodded, her eyes misty but full of understanding. "He's stronger than any of us," she whispered, hugging Jack tightly. He wagged his tail in response, his eyes closing in contentment. As the months turned into a year, Jack's journey began to inspire others. Emily had started sharing his story with her friends and even posted about him online. The response was overwhelming. People from all over wrote to us, sharing how Jack's incredible return had given them hope in their own lives. Some spoke of lost pets, while others found comfort in the message of resilience and loyalty that Jack represented. One particular letter stood out. It came from a woman named Linda, who had recently lost her dog. "Reading about Jack gave me the strength to keep looking," she wrote. "I know now that giving up isn't an option. Thank you for sharing his story. It reminded me that love is always worth fighting for." Jack had become more than just our miracle. He was a symbol of hope for others, a living testament to the unbreakable bond between a dog and their family, and though he couldn't understand the words of praise that poured in, I believe he felt the love. As Jack grew older, his pace slowed, and his naps grew longer, but his spirit remained as strong as ever. On quiet evenings, he'd sit with us on the porch, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if keeping watch over the home he'd fought so hard to return to. I often wondered if he thought about his journey, the miles he traveled, the hardships he'd endured. But perhaps, like me, he was simply grateful for the now. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I found myself reflecting on the lessons Jack had taught us. His story wasn't just about survival, it was about love, loyalty, and the unyielding determination to find your way back to those who matter most. He reminded me that, even when the odds seem insurmountable, hope can light the way. I turned to Emily, who sat beside Jack, her hand resting gently on his side. "You know," I said, my voice soft, "Jack didn't just find his way home. He brought us back too. He reminded us what it means to never give up on the ones you love." Emily smiled, leaning down to kiss Jack's head. "He's the bad dog in the world," she said, her voice full of emotion. Jack let out a soft huff, as if agreeing, and leaned into her touch. In that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, Jack's legacy would live on, in our hearts, in our home, and in the lives of everyone his story had touched. Jack wasn't just a dog. He was family, a fighter, and a reminder that love, no matter the distance or time, will always find its way back. If Jack's story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Have you ever experienced an incredible bond with a pet? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Let's keep celebrating the love and loyalty that make dogs such amazing companions.